This is only a short story, but one I really want to share. There was this girl who I'd been seeing for a few months that I was 21, and she was 24 and had a boy about 2 years old. She was basically normal, had a good job, and took care of her kid, okay. She was kind of a dim bulb, though, not very bright, that I was bored in the relationship and really didn't want to become a stepdad to the kid. So I ended it in a no problem, right? I run into her about a month or so later at a bar, and we end up going back to her place for a night of XX. The next morning, she makes coffee and breakfast that I go to school, and she goes to work that I get incredibly sick on my way to school and vomit multiple times that I make it to school, and I'm still puking. So I find the nurse or medical office and vaguely recall being loaded into an ambulance that it's all blank after that I come to in the hospital. And the doctor tells me that I OD'd on a huge amount of meth and had about 5 minutes left to live before they figured it out. Oh. And by the way, he tells me there are some federal agents here to talk to you. It turns out she planned this whole thing and decided that if she couldn't have me, then no one could. She went to jail but got a reduced sentence for turning on the family member who was making and distributing the meth. This happened when I was in my late 30s on a fishing trip to celebrate a promotion I had received from my job. Throughout my young adult years, I've always been out on the water and never once had come across anything or had a reason to be afraid. However, this one night of the trip took my fascination with fishing and crushed it. The night of my trip, I had stopped my boat to save fuel and found myself on my boat watching over the ocean. It was a quiet and calm night, and there was no land for miles, just the sound of the calm waves hitting the boat. So there I was, sitting on top of my boat somewhere in the mid-Atlantic, when I saw something. I got out my binoculars, and with the light from the moon, I was able to see something bobbing along the water. Because of how dark it was too difficult to see just what it was. My first thought was to get my wife, who was sleeping, but I didn't want to wake her. The closer it got, I then made it out to be a raft of some type, tied together with bamboo and a tarp strapped to it. Upon this raft was not a single soul. The chances of coming across a raft this far out at sea were small enough. In this part of the ocean, the scary part about this was thinking about the person or people who once sailed that raft, why they sailed, and how they met their fate. That is what stuck with me. As a child growing up in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the local playground was a place of joy and laughter, a haven where my friends and I could escape the world's worries. But one summer day, that all changed. It started out like any other day, with sun shining brightly overhead and the sound of children's laughter filling the air, but as we played on the swings and climbed the jungle gym, a sense of unease began to settle over us. It was subtle at first, a feeling of being watched, of something lurking just beyond the edge of our vision. But as the afternoon wore on, the feeling grew stronger, until it felt as though we were being stalked by some unseen presence. As we ventured deeper into the playground, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive, the air thick with a sense of foreboding. And then, as we reached the old abandoned slide at the far end of the playground, we saw it, a figure, dark and shadowy, lurking among the rusted metal. With a cry of terror, we turned and fled from the playground, our hearts pounding in our chests as we raced home. But even as we reached the safety of our house, we could still feel the eyes of the creature watching us from the darkness, its malevolent presence lingering in the air like a foul stench. In the days that followed, the playground became a place of dread, its once cheerful atmosphere replaced by an aura of fear and mistrust. And though we never spoke of what we had seen that day, the memory of the haunted playground would stay with us forever, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the borders of our reality. I've read an awful lot of spooky night driving stories that involve some kind of dumb urban legend, guys at the side of the highway with an axe and a fursuit or whatever, ghostly apparitions that are 3-5 me. While I'm quick to call out stories like that, I do have a scary night driving story of my own. Although this one doesn't include anything remotely supernatural, I'm willing to bet it was 100 times more terrifying than anything that does. I'm driving back one Sunday from my mom's place in upstate New York, headed back into Manhattan to get ready for the working week ahead. It had been an exhausting weekend as my family had been celebrating Eid together, and I was about ready to pass out by the time it came to drive back into the city. I thought I had everything down. I had my coffee, I cracked my driver's side window, everything they tell you to do when you're driving while tired, but still, one moment I'm driving, concentrating on whatever NPR show was on, and then the next minute, I wake up to pure terror. All I can hear is this deep rumbling, so hard and loud it feels like it's vibrating the entire car, and coming right at me at like 70 miles an hour is the freaking highway guard rail. I slammed my brakes on, heard all kinds of honking behind me, and from what I understand, I only narrowly avoided causing a major pileup. But more than just a pileup, if I'd have sped off the road doing 70 like that, there's absolutely no way I'd be around to write this today. Please, take my advice. Coffee and cool air just isn't enough sometimes. Sleep it off. Don't risk your life. In the heart of the dense forest stood a lake, its waters dark and foreboding, shrouded in mystery and fear. Local legends whispered of a curse upon the lake, warning fishermen and adventurers alike to stay far away. But curiosity, as it often does, beckoned the bold to its shores. Among those drawn to the lake was Andrew, a seasoned angler with a thirst for adventure that overshadowed any superstition. Armed with his fishing gear and determination, he ventured into the woods, guided by stories of monstrous catches and whispered horrors. As he reached the edge of the lake, an eerie mist rose from its surface, obscuring what lay beneath. Ignoring the chill that crept up his spine, Andrew cast his line into the murky depths, eager to test his skills against whatever lurked below. Hours passed with little success, and the sun began to sink below the horizon, casting long shadows across the water. Just as Andrew prepared to call it a day, his line suddenly went taut, pulling him forward with unexpected force. With a grunt of surprise, he struggled to reel in his catch, the water churning and bubbling as whatever he had hooked fought against him. Heart pounding, Andrew finally managed to haul his prize onto the shore, only to stagger back in horror at what lay before him. It was no fish that writhed and thrashed at his feet, but a grotesque abomination straight from the nightmares of ancient lore. Its twisted form was a grotesque amalgamation of scales and tentacles, its eyes burning with a malevolent intelligence that sent shivers down Andrew's spine. In a panic, he stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet as he scrambled to escape the creature's grasp. But it was too late. The creature lunged forward with lightning speed, its tentacles wrapping around Andrew's legs and dragging him screaming into the depths below. As a child, my family lived in a sprawling old house with a basement that seemed to hold endless secrets. But it wasn't until one fateful night that I discovered the true horror lurking beneath our home. It was a stormy evening, and the wind howled outside as rain lashed against the windows. With the power out and the house plunged into darkness, my siblings and I huddled together in the living room, our hearts pounding with fear. But as the night wore on, an eerie sound began to echo through the house. A soft scratching coming from somewhere deep below. At first, we dismissed it as the sound of branches scraping against the windows, but as the scratching grew louder and more insistent, we knew something was terribly wrong. Summoning our courage, we ventured into the basement, armed with nothing but a flashlight and a sense of dread. As we descended the creaking stairs, the air grew colder, and the darkness seemed to press in around us like a suffocating blanket. But what we found waiting for us in the depths of the basement was far worse than anything we could have imagined. A creature hunched and twisted, its eyes gleaming with malice as it lurked in the shadows. With a scream of terror, we fled from the basement, the creature hot on our heels. As we reached the safety of the main floor, we slammed the door shut behind us, praying that whatever lurked below would never escape its dark prison. To this day, I can still hear the scratching coming from the basement, a chilling reminder of the horrors that lurk just beneath the surface of our everyday lives. And though we have long since moved away from that house, the memory of that night will haunt me forever, a reminder of the darkness that dwells within us all. Submitted to me all the way back in 2015, this account was sent by a mother of 2 children, a 6-year-old boy and an 8-year-old girl. Almost every night, between the hours of 12 and 5 a.m., the boy would come to the parents' bedroom crying that he was scared because someone or something was in his room at the edge of his bed. The boy would claim that every night, the person or thing would come out from his closet and move to the same spot at the foot of his bed, standing there without moving. The first few times, the parents would check the boy's bedroom just to make him feel better. The closet door would always be open, and when questioned about why it was always open when it was supposed to be shut, he would insist it was because he was telling the truth about the thing in his closet. Every time the parents showed their son that the closet was empty, he would go back to sleep. Their 8-year-old daughter never had any similar issues. For a few nights, the parents allowed him to sleep in their room on the floor with a blanket. Eventually, though, after this had been going on for too long, the parents decided to humor him one more time and asked him to draw what the thing at the foot of his bed looked like. His drawing sent chills down his parents' spines. It depicted a grudge-like figure that seemed terrifying enough to give a grown man nightmares, let alone a 6-year-old boy. There also appeared to be something at the window, and when questioned about this, the boy said that he sometimes saw it at the window too when it wasn't at the foot of his bed. The parents' solution to this was to move their son's bed to the spare bedroom across the hall, which didn't have any big closets. The mother who submitted this couldn't help but feel a little creeped out herself by the drawing, especially every time he came crying to their room in the middle of the night. My husband Jack is in the military. We have generally lived on base at every station we have been to because the surrounding towns can be very crime-ridden and sketchy, and with my husband gone most of the time, the extra security is appreciated. I work from home due to us moving so often. One afternoon, I was taking a break, had made a bite to eat, and was snuggling up on the couch with my dog. That's when I heard the sliding glass door open. It was so nonchalant I thought it was Jack. I saw the cat run from the kitchen and a shadow standing near the door entering it. I thought maybe he had come back for something, so I called out for him and was like, "What are you doing home? Did you forget something?" No answer. This is where I just got an eerie feeling. After I asked what he was doing here, I saw the shadow move and heard the click of the sliding door lock. From there, he walked to the laundry room and shut the door. I still had received no response, so I'm sitting on the couch, scared out of my mind, and I call my husband, hoping to hear his phone in the laundry room. I don't hear a ring, but he does answer. I asked him why he came home, and he didn't answer me. All he says is, "That wasn't me. Grab the dog and get in your car." I freak out. After getting off the phone with Jack, I grab the dog and run to my car. From there, I called the military police. Waiting for them was probably the longest 20 minutes of my life. When they got there, they cleared the house and found no one. They asked me to make a statement, and even they were baffled that someone would try this on a base. We still live here. I'm just so scared that he'll come back. I was about 13 to 14 years old at the time, and it was around the 4th of July. Every year around this time, the town I grew up in would have a 4th of July fair in the center of town. It was always a great place to get together with friends without parents, which at that age is a treat. So a few of my friends and I were walking around the fair just hanging out. It was super hot that day, the middle of summer and all, and we were all in tank tops and shorts, mind you. We were still prepubescent at this point. We all blossomed a bit later. So as we stop in front of a carnival game, I turn and see this man, probably mid-30s, in a full cycling gear with sunglasses on. Not weird, there's plenty of cycling enthusiasts in our town. The thing that grabbed my attention, however, was that his hand was down his pants. Me being a naive 13-year-old girl at the time, I laughed and just thought he was adjusting his tight biker shorts or something. As we walked away, I whispered to my friends to check out the guy fixing his shorts, and they looked and also found it funny. We carried on with our day and forgot about the man. Eventually, I don't really remember who approached us specifically, but an older friend of ours told us to get on the sidewalk immediately. When we complied, she told us that the man in the biking gear had been following us around the fair. We were kind of behind a lot of the carts, so we weren't in the main part of the fair where everyone could see, and continued to have his hand down his pants, masturbating as he was following us. Someone obviously called the police and arrested the guy. I heard later that they searched his car and found porn inside and a few other suspicious items, but I never heard any more about him or who he was. My friends and I never really mentioned it after that as well. I don't think we fully grasped the situation at the time and just kind of blocked it out. I mean, still to this day, almost 10 years later, it makes me squirm when I think about it. Let's not meet again ever, creepy cyclist. Growing up, my parents were incredibly strict and overprotective. No sleepovers, no boys, and no going anywhere without their explicit approval. They kept tabs on who I was with, their phone numbers, their parents' phone numbers, and exactly what time I was expected back. Definitely no dates. That I rarely even went out with friends. Going to see a movie on a Saturday was a special occasion. The only place I could get around my parents' rigid rules was online, where, because they didn't know how to use the computer, they never monitored me. That's why in high school I rebelled in the only way I knew how. I started a blog. Yep, I was 17 and I ran an erotic blog. No, not porn. More like photos of myself wearing very little clothing in bed. Everything was just so covered for the purpose of anonymity because, as incredibly dumb and naive as I was back then, I had at least an iota of common sense. None of the photos showed my entire face, just my mouth or jawline, the arch of my neck, never my eyes. Interspersed with the photos were blog entries, the life of my amorously blessed alter ego, Claire. Claire was completely fictional and therefore she was a lot of things I wasn't, primarily social and sexually active. I would fabricate stories of dates, affairs, and sexual experimentation. Just dumb, romance novel type stuff. I was living vicariously through this confident, beautiful, made-up girl. I fancied myself an alright writer back then, but looking back, it's pretty funny now. It was probably mostly just drivel, but I enjoyed running it, and my readers seemed to like it. You'd think it would have just been dirty old men, but I had quite a few women readers too, who told me how I was helping them become more confident. There was something just so exhilarating about having people be drawn to you online when you're so lonely and cloistered in real life. Anyway, fast forward 3 years. By and now I was halfway across the country in college, out from under my parents' rule. I had a few good friends, and I was doing pretty well. I still had trouble being very social, because I was so unused to it, but at least I wasn't so lonely anymore. I hadn't updated the blog in over 2 years, and honestly, I had mostly forgotten all about it. I also had a boyfriend. His name was David, and we met in the history seminar in the fall of my sophomore year. He was tall, lovely, kind, and had quite an outgoing personality, probably in contrast to our awkward first date when I, shy and still mostly petrified of social interaction, could barely string together 10 complete sentences, but he seemed to like my shyness. He was outgoing and forward, making friends wherever we went. He'd constantly tell me it was cute that I blushed when people talked to me and say how I should be glad that he was with me to facilitate conversation with other people. One time he told me I was lucky that he had stuck around. He said no other guy would have bothered. I was so affection-starved that I was convinced he was right. One day, about 3 months into the relationship, over Christmas break, I got a call from him at home. When I picked up, the first thing he said was, Who's Claire? It took a second, but when I realized what he must have been referring to, my entire body went cold. How was this possible? How could he have found out about what I said? Claire www.claireblog.com. Is this you? My heart pounded, and my mind raced that I had no idea how he had found the blog. Could I possibly deny it? There was nothing on the entire website that linked back to my real name or my real email address that I had made sure of that. None of the photos showed my face, but they showed enough that if you knew me in real life, you could probably tell it was me. Feeling cornered, I told him I would talk to him later and hung up. That I spent that whole day on the verge of a panic attack. Finally, I realized I had to just admit it. For some reason, at the time, it seemed like the end of the world that my boyfriend had found my stupid blog from high school. Nowadays I would be like, yeah, I ran a blog and posted hot pics of myself. So what? It was all just fiction anyway, but of course, I've grown older and wiser now, and I was a naive idiot back then. That I called him back and cried as I explained all the reasons I had written and maintained this blog. Eventually, he said, "It's okay, I think I understand." At some point, I had asked him how he had found it, and he told me that an ex-girlfriend of his had seen posts on Facebook of us together, went on Google, searched for me, and somehow turned up this blog, the link to which she then sent to David. Sorry, he told me, I don't talk to her anymore. She just still bothers me all the time. That she's kind of a psycho. I was a little upset at that, but I didn't want to annoy him any further, so I didn't press the issue. Things went mostly back to normal then, but then the emails started. That I woke up to the first one about a week later. That IT had been sent at 3 a.m. and was from some blatantly fake address, like Claire_6969 @hotmail.com. All it said was, "You're disgusting." I realized it must have been from David's psycho ex. I was a little unnerved, but I just deleted and ignored it. However, the emails didn't stop. They kept coming, at least one, sometimes two a night, always from a new fake email like Claire_the_72993, Claire_the____, etc. Always time-stamped exactly at 3 or 4 a.m. The contents of the emails began to increase in their level of vitriol. First, it was more of the same, variations of, "You are so gross," or "You're up." Then she would send me copies of the photos from my blog, which I had deleted right after David confronted me about it. She must have saved the entries somewhere, with horrible things written across them, like "fat," or "die," or "kill yourself," etc. I showed David the emails and asked if he could make her stop, but he just shrugged and said it was out of his control. It kept escalating. She started mentioning my friends' names in the emails, things like, "I showed Rachel and Alex you're sick," website, "They're disgusted by you," or "I told Evan and James, they act like they're your friends, but behind your back they all think you're disgusting." Sometimes she would pretend to be one of my friends and write things like, "I said hi to you on campus yesterday and you think I like hanging out, but I know what you really are, you're just a ___." Once she copied and pasted an entire blog entry into the body of an email. It was non-stop, night after night. I would wake up in the morning terrified of seeing another email from her in my inbox. That I stopped opening them. That I was constantly stressed. I never knew for sure if she had actually sent my photos around to everyone I knew. That I lost sleep, that I lost weight. That I begged David to make her stop, but he kept saying there was nothing he could do. Things with David were deteriorating as well. That he was annoyed that I kept bringing up the emails. That he began to make it sound as though it were all my fault. That he said it was hard to believe that I hadn't actually done all those sexual things I had written about. This was the kicker. His ex was from my hometown, he said, and she had told him stories she'd heard from people I went to high school with about all the dirty things I used to do, orgies, bondage, hard drugs. How could I lie to him and trick him into believing I was a shy virgin? He wanted to know that I told him none of those things were true. She was obviously making it up. Do you really believe her over me? I asked. I don't know what to believe, He said that he told me I had become untrustworthy, that as twisted as it was. I started to believe that I apologized to him over and over until finally he forgave me and told me it was all right, that he believed me, that I was lucky he understood and would stay with me, because who else would? I had never been so relieved that I was lucky. I was so lucky, wasn't I? We'd been taking things really slow physically because I actually was a virgin, and regardless of make-believe Claire's make-believe sexcapades, anything sex-related still made me incredibly nervous. But after that, I had sex with David for the first time because I felt like I owed him, that he had stayed with me. I was so lucky that I didn't enjoy it afterwards. He whispered, "I believe you. You really have never had sex before." It felt sickly like winning. Eventually, after about 2 months, the ex must have gotten bored because the emails slowed and then stopped. David broke up with me shortly after, cruelly and kindly, the day after my 21st birthday. I was a complete wreck for a while, but hey, life goes on. 3 months or so after that, I got another email from Claire_bear_69@hotmail.com at 3 a.m. "I can't believe you haven't killed yourself. You should." For the first time, I responded, "We're not even dating anymore. You're pathetic. Get a __life." That was the last I ever heard from her. To this day, I don't know her name. I don't know how she found my blog, or how she knew the names of my friends, or why she was so hell-bent on making me miserable for so long. Even now, when I get Facebook messages or emails from people I don't know, my first reaction is to panic. Of course, I have since realized that I was not at all lucky in my relationship. Nor was David the sweet guy that I thought he was at the time. I understand now that it hadn't been my fault. I owed him nothing. It's been 5 years, but I haven't been in a relationship since. I don't know if I could. I think the worst is this. I used to enjoy writing. At one time, I was proud of my blog because, small and insignificant as it was something I created. Even though it was make-believe, it was still mine. They had taken something I had been proud of and turned it into a source of shame. I don't like to write anymore. Even now, I get angry at how they've taken that from me and how easily I was fooled. I'm stupid. I'm naive. Eventually, I got the story of their relationship and how they broke up and why she was so psycho. The details are irrelevant, but suffice it to say, it turns out he had been even more awful to her than he had been to me. But instead of staying far, far away like I've done, all she wanted was for him to take her back. To clarify, none of the email addresses or web addresses used are real. It was just always something blatantly fake and throwaway. I currently work at a restaurant somewhere in the Midwest. Now, obviously, I can't say what restaurant, but it's on a pretty busy road with lots of cars and lots of people walking on the road to get to the bus stop or whatever their destination may be. It's got its own parking lot where I will usually park closer to the doors. But the story I'm about to tell is the one time I didn't, and that night I sincerely regret my actions. To give some backstory, a couple of years ago, I just so happened to work at the sports bar and grill directly across from the parking lot for my current job. I worked there for only 4 months and had plenty of interesting stories about that place, but that's for another time. Anyways, while I worked my previous job, I didn't have a car, so I either walked to and from work or I got a ride. Now, mind you, I would walk home at around 10 p.m. some nights on a barely lit road when cars weren't always around. This naturally made me wary, and this was on top of the fact that older men would constantly hit on me as a minor. It would make me feel watched. This backstory of my old job might not seem important at the moment, and I didn't think it would ever become relevant again, but it matters in the end, I promise. While working at my old job, I was a minor, as previously stated, but that never stopped drunken men from approaching me and being inappropriate. There was one man in particular who I never forgot about and who came back to haunt me in the worst way. The man was taller, quite good-looking, and always wore expensive-looking clothing and accessories. He had a very elegant vibe to him, which is why I did not think much of him when he would talk to me while I was working. He started out very polite, asking about how work was going and how my day was, stuff like that. But as the weeks went on, he would ask more and more personal questions, which started making me suspicious of him. The event that occurred right before I quit was a night I wish I could forget. Thinking back on my days at that sports bar, I remember it being a long night, probably because it was sports season and our restaurant would get very busy. As a hostess, it was stressful trying to take calls when there was shouting because the hockey team wanted the Golden Cup or whatnot. That night, after I had finished cleaning the bathrooms, I remember him being at the host stand waiting for me. I approached him and tried to make polite conversation, but I could tell immediately that he was acting strange. His gaze was shifty, and he didn't look as put together as he normally did. The first thing he said to me was something along the lines of, "You're only 16, right?" To which I confirmed, and he continued with something like, "Well, when you're 18, I'll have something for you. It'll be a surprise. Just wait till you're 18, and he promptly left through the bar section of the grill. I stood shocked for a moment before composing myself and finishing my cleaning so I could get the hell out of there. After I finished counting my drawer down, I went out back and unlocked the bike that I had gotten a month or so after I started working there, and I began to ride home. Note that I was paranoid as hell as I was doing this because seriously, who the hell says that to an underage girl? I watched my back all night as I rode home, and I felt watched the entire time. It was kind of my fault that he knew my age. I had told him long ago as I mentioned something about my birthday plans, but his comment on my age made me feel sick to my stomach regardless. Now let's jump to more recently when I started my new job just across the parking lot. It's been years since I worked there, and I had just about let go of the memories of working at the forsaken sports bar, but something happened recently that made the memories feel like yesterday. The stimulus checks and nice weather have brought a surge of customers to my current restaurant. I've worked here for almost a year now, and we have been busier in the past month than we've been since I first started. This means that occasionally I don't get to park right by the doors, and I must park a bit further away. On this particular day that still makes me feel nervous thinking about, I had to park basically at the farthest corner of our lot due to a large amount of staff and customers taking the closer spots. That day, I thought nothing of it as I went in for my closing shift, and I worked a long and stressful shift until about 10 p.m. I work at the front of the restaurant, and our closing duties can be pretty grueling. That night was especially bad because I was the only one up front besides the manager, who has to go back and forth between the kitchen and front to help. I finished all my cleaning, albeit a bit later than usual, and I felt bad for taking so long, but they weren't too upset because a coworker of mine was waiting on a ride, so they had to wait anyway. So with that, I said my goodbyes to the two of them and headed out the back doors to my car. I was immediately irritated that I had to walk so far to get to my car. And I started digging out for my keys. I didn't realize that there was a third car in our parking lot until it was almost too late. I finally grabbed my keys after a moment of struggling to find them, and I realized that the third car is finally, in fact, not my manager. It was parked right next to mine, although it did look similar, which is why I didn't think much of it at first, being exhausted from work. Upon getting closer, I realized there's a person inside, so I remember thinking, is my coworker's ride here? But no one came out to go home, so I assumed not. I looked back closer to the restaurant and realized that in front of the building, where I couldn't see before as I left out the back, my manager's car was sitting empty right up front. All of these thoughts were piecing together as I slowly trailed to my car, and after connecting the dots, I tried to see who was in the car waiting for me. I remember squinting at them. I didn't have my glasses on, and that's probably what made them realize I noticed them. And with that, they turned their car on immediately. I looked away because the car lights were too bright, and when I tried to look back again, the inside light turned on. I stopped dead in my tracks as if I was paralyzed. Just writing this is starting to make my eyes tear up for some reason, but the expression that this man was wearing invoked so much fear I think my heart quite literally skipped a beat. The man's features were a bit blurry with the distance and darkness, but I could tell he knew me from somewhere. With that little overhead light illuminating his face, the lack of facial expression is what really made me scared shitless because I figured he would smile, frown, wave, or literally anything, but instead, he sat there, arms at his sides, as he waited for me to come closer. Now, as a young woman, I should know better than to ignore my instincts telling me to get the hell out of a situation, but for a split second, I almost felt compelled to continue walking towards my car. I can't quite explain why, but I specifically recalled taking one step forward before pausing, asking myself, what the hell am I doing, and then hightailing it back to the back door. I felt like I was prey about to be eaten, the way that I sensed his overwhelming presence behind me the whole time. I debated going back and then running to safety. He just sat right in his seat and didn't move an inch, or so I assume, as I didn't look back until I reached the door. I glanced back at his car for a split second before dashing inside, and all I remember seeing was his cabin light had turned off, and I could only see a dark figure. The menacing light no longer illuminated his face. I didn't need to see his face to know he was still staring. I could feel his beady eyes staring right at me. After scaring the hell out of my coworkers by yanking open the door as I did, I explained what happened. They both immediately got serious and told me to wait with them while they waited for my other workers' ride. We sat for a few more minutes, and they talked about how freaky the situation was and how they'd call the cops if he was still there when we went outside together, and I just sat in silence. I was silent because in the few minutes after the encounter with the strange man, I knew I recognized him from somewhere. He was that same guy who had told me to wait for him when I turned 18. It took me a while because he didn't look like how he used to. He looked a lot more rough and a bit older and much, much scarier. I don't know if he saw me that day as I brought out the trash or maybe when I walked into work, but he knew I was there somehow, and that scared the hell out of me. When their ride finally arrived, we all walked out together, and my eyes instantly shot to the area where I knew his car was parked. It was just my car, though, waiting for me to climb inside and get home ASAP. The manager saw my coworker off in their parents' car and walked me to mine. She helped me check under my car and inside it, as apparently, she had dealt with a stalker before and knew all of the tricks to stay safe. I thanked her profusely and got in, locking my doors right away. I watched her as she walked to her car and started to leave the lot. I looked frantically to see if I could spot his car anywhere in the shopping area that connected with our parking lots, but found nothing. I live close to my work, so I took a long way home that night, fearing that he was waiting for me to go home to do something sinister. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well that night as I kept thinking that he was in the darkest corner of my room with that hollow expression on his face. I considered making a police report, but seeing as the police tend to be useless in scenarios like this and I literally only had a first name, which could have been fake, I decided against it. In the week since then, I haven't seen him or heard from him. I still think about him every time I leave the building, half expecting him to be either standing outside ready to snatch me or parked right next to my car. I always leave with my coworkers now, as my parents insisted I begin doing after I told them about what happened. I started waiting tables when I was 18 to supplement my hourly income at a popular fast food chain. Soon enough, I became well acquainted with an older man named Tom. He was probably in his mid-60s and very obese. He'd regularly come into the little diner where I worked, and he was a regular prior to my employment there. The other younger females who worked in the restaurant didn't like to wait on him because he was kind of weird and had a very creepy, overly excited, animated type of vibe, but I didn't mind because it was a guaranteed $5 to $10 tip every day. I was also good at talking to people and good at putting up with, so I happily entertained him in a family-friendly way. The first thing he would do was make cartoons on the computer and then excitedly give them to me and other servers. The other servers were uncomfortable with it even though, at this point, it was very innocent. It was generic clip art that maybe had everyone's names written by each character, but still, some servers were uncomfortable enough that management had asked him to stop bringing them in. He once asked me if I liked them almost in an unexplainable childlike way, seeking approval, so I told him that they were cute and fun because they seemed harmless enough, and I could tell making them and gifting them made him happy. I figured it was his pastime during the later part of his life since he was unmarried and had no kids, and his daily hobby was visiting different women at different restaurants, some of them older and some younger like I was. He would regularly talk about the lives of the other waitresses that he would visit, and though I hadn't met any of them, I kind of felt like I knew them. Genuinely, I just figured this guy was lonely, and there's nothing wrong with that. He would call me sunshine and try to offer advice where it wasn't warranted or solicited. I wasn't afraid to respectfully yet aggressively put him in his place. I remember one specific occasion that he tried to criticize my relationship with my boyfriend. It was like what you'd think a super conservative grandparent might say, expressed to me as if he was my father and providing me life-changing insight to put me on the right path, though I felt I wasn't on the wrong path at all. I was a full-time student, full-time employee, and I fully supported myself and had a good outlook and attitude on life. Anyway, I put him in his place so hard and so fast that he turned sheepish and childlike, kind of like he transitioned from trying to be a father to acting like a child who needed mom's or my approval. The next time he visited, he had a hand-carved woodworking thing that he made with my boyfriend's initials on it as an apology. He would buy me packs of gum and mints and take printed photos of himself with a scolding look in the caption saying, "No smoking, sunshine," to try to deter me from cigarettes. I've since quit, by the way, without his help. Everyone else thought it was really creepy, but whatever. The first year of me being his waitress, his gifts and actions got progressively more expressive. He started writing poems and short stories that had bad grammar and were so elementary they were almost painful. But he told me he just started to try it out, so I encouraged him, thinking that he's just lonely and needs a pastime. I had no problem with him writing little Hallmark card-style poems and giving them to me, but the slightly off-putting aspect was that all the poems and stories had a general theme of love and family. Also, I think it was around this time that he started looking at my Facebook page often. We weren't even friends on there, and I told him I was never going to accept his friend request, so to not ever send one. He would occasionally Photoshop pictures of me from my Facebook page and put my face on a cartoon body or something like that. He became very interested in me and all of my sisters. He would write stories about me and my sisters or make comic book style artwork about my twin and me being superheroes. He even found a photo of my twin on Facebook somewhere and started using her face photoshopped on things too. When I did some traveling, I took some RC-style pictures with a few in the background. And he once edited and photoshopped other tourists out of the background and then lightened the sky and printed lined pictures with fancy borders for me to have. Thinking about it now, he probably kept these photos for himself too. After a year at my first serving job, I left for another serving job where I'd be working weird third shift hours. I kind of thought that would be the end of Tom, but boy was I wrong. He went out of his way to come at weird hours and to the new place at least twice a week, and never once did I tell him my schedule. He would just drive by and see my car. The stories he would write became progressively sexual and longer. I guess he finally felt comfortable to share these things with me and would always preface me for anything that was more erotic. It was like he wanted a friend, wanted to be my father, and wanted me to be his mother, all in this weird, childish, overly animated type of way. A few times, he made me the subject of his stories, though he never went super explicit with those. The one that sticks out was me being a super sexy badass cowgirl sheriff, and all the men at the saloon wanted me. He would include strange details like how someone had an STD, and if I remember correctly, he made my sister the character that got an STD, and I had a huge issue with that. At this point, I've known this man and been well acquainted with him for nearly 3 years. I genuinely felt sorry for the guy and felt like I was able to offer him a friend when he really needed one. I was very aware that something was off about him, but I was okay with it because, though it was hard to pinpoint exactly, I understood and also knew that he would never, or could never given his size and fitness, hurt me. Admittedly, this was a fault of mine. As a server, I offered more than food. I accidentally became a psychiatrist for more than just this guy. There was a 20-year-old with autism that I became good buddies with, despite him offering me money every once in a while for a tip. Also, there was a 40-year-old man who thought he was going to marry a stripper half of his age after he gave her all his savings and sold his Mustang to give her more money. There was also the paranoid 50-year-old schizophrenic man who had clearly never been diagnosed or received help. I digress. I guess I just want to be transparent that I was aware of all the red flags, but I was okay with it. But then things started to really cross a line, though they probably already were past that. When I got engaged, Tom would ask me stuff like if I'd let him hold my baby when I have kids. He started to write stories and make cards and cartoons from my fiancé's perspective. He would say, "I bet this is how Luke feels about you," and also do it from a mother's perspective, saying stuff like, "It must be a mother's dream." I mean, at this point he was seriously making so much stuff, be it cartoons, pictures, or stories, that he'd bring it all to me in a manila folder. And it would be long, along the lines of fatherly, motherly, childish, silly, sexual, romantic, etc. I decided to keep the folders in my filing cabinet just in case there was ever a case against him that needed evidence. My fiancé and I had an open dialogue about Tom, and at this point, we decided that it was best to cut him off. I was looking for a new job to get off the wacky hours I was working, and the timing just seemed right. After cutting him off, Tom still had a weird contact with me through my older sister. She was a server at another restaurant that he frequented, though she avoided him and asked to never serve him given his interactions with me. However, she was also engaged, and her wedding date was approaching. He also wrote her letters and made her cards with words that were way too heartfelt coming from a stranger regarding her marriage. Anyway, Tom decided to ask a few of the other servers if they were planning on going to the wedding. 2 of them were, and upon hearing this news, Tom described me in detail and asked the other servers to try to take some pictures of me for him. When I heard about this, it was about 6 months after I had cut him off. I had a big fat eye roll over it and thought, whatever, about it because the servers weren't going to do it. And he was still respecting our request to not contact me any longer. It's also relevant to note that I had blocked him from my Facebook, which I hadn't even actively used in 2 years or more. However, prior to the cutoff, and even shortly after, he still sent me multiple messages on Facebook every day ranging from as simple as "Good morning, sunshine," into intricate and extensive stories. A timeline reminder before the climax, I first waited on him around May 2015. He followed me to my next job and my long-term fast food job around the middle of 2016. We continued to interact until I cut him off around February and March 2018. One day, I was cleaning out my filing cabinet in December 2019. I stupidly decided that I should throw all the creepy and weird unsolicited artwork away. It had been nearly 2 years with no issues and no attempt to contact, and the stuff was just cluttering my space. Last week, as I was sitting in my living room, a recognizable vehicle was parked outside of my driveway on the wrong side of the road. The man had his car window down, and I could see a flash. I quickly grabbed my glasses to try to discern what was going on. I saw his childish, overly animated smile, and I recognized his hair and facial hair. I realized the shirt he was wearing was the same exact style and type of shirt that Tom wears. I realized that I recognized the vehicle because it's the same vehicle that would pull up to my place of employment 3 to 5 times a week for almost 3 years. I realized it was Tom outside of my residence over 2 years later, taking pictures of my car and home with that goddamn digital camera he took my picture with twice before in the past. Bodleian Library stood as a beacon of knowledge in the small town of Oxford. However, its history was marred by tragedy and mystery. Legend had it that the library was built upon cursed ground where restless spirits roamed the earth seeking vengeance. One fateful night, Luna, a dedicated librarian, found herself alone in the library after hours. As she went about her duties, she heard faint whispers echoing through the empty halls. Brushing it off as her imagination, she continued her work until the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Suddenly, the books on the shelves began to fly off, pages fluttering in the air as if guided by an unseen force. Terrified, Luna fled to the safety of her office, only to find the door sealed shut by an unknown presence. Panic gripped her as she realized she was trapped inside the library with something malevolent. Desperate for answers, Luna delved into the library's archives, uncovering the dark history of Bodleian. Centuries ago, the land upon which the library stood had been cursed by a vengeful witch, cursing all who dared to trespass upon it. Determined to break the curse and free herself from the library's grip, Luna embarked on a perilous journey through the hidden chambers and secret passages of Bodleian. Along the way, she encountered the spirits of those who had perished within its walls, their anguished cries echoing in the darkness. At the heart of the library, Luna discovered the source of the curse, a forgotten tome bound in human flesh, its pages teeming with dark magic. With trembling hands, she began to recite the incantations inscribed within, hoping to banish the curse once and for all. As the final words left her lips, a blinding light enveloped the library, and Luna felt a sense of peace wash over her. When she opened her eyes, she found herself standing outside Bodleian Library, the curse broken and the spirits laid to rest. From that day forth, the library stood as a symbol of resilience and triumph, a testament to the power of courage and determination in the face of darkness. This happened in the early summer of 2020, right when COVID was at its peak. I'm sure most of you can relate to staying at home during quarantine and not being able to go out. With the constant boredom of staying locked away inside of my house, I decided to take a day for a fishing trip. I live in South Florida, a place where it's notorious to go fishing. My state was still on lockdown, but I didn't care. I drove about an hour's drive away to Key West and went under a bridge to where I was sure I would get a decent catch. The waves were a little rough, but it didn't matter. Fast forward to about 30 minutes later, I'm still fishing, waiting for a bite. I look to my left and see what appeared to be a blue tarp setup behind one of the pillars of the bridge. I thought nothing of it, but for whatever reason, I looked back and saw a man standing there looking at me. To be honest, he kind of startled me as I jumped a little bit and nodded my head as a hello. However, he didn't seem to acknowledge my greeting as he kept staring at me with this blank expression I couldn't even describe. By the looks of it, he looked homeless, worn, torn clothes and had a full-on white beard, kind of like what you would picture as your typical old fisherman. What made me unsettled, however, was that his right hand was always behind his back. I pretended to concentrate on fishing, but I could still feel his gaze looking at me. Suddenly, he then jumps into the water and is swimming directly toward me. Even with the rough waves and the current from under the bridge, he was extremely fast. I was out from under that bridge in less than 15 seconds and got in my car with my foot glued to the gas pedal. I also left my stuff behind as, obviously, my life was more worth saving than that. I drove about a few miles where I stopped at a gas station for a snack and then proceeded to go home. What that man was going to do to me or what he wanted, I don't know. I assumed he was probably a dangerous homeless person who didn't like people near where he lived. The next day, I drove back to the bridge and tried to get my stuff, only to find it gone. Not only that, but the blue tarp and the man were also gone. Nothing was left except for an old hunting knife left on one of the platforms where the pillars were held up. After seeing it, I knew that's probably what he was hiding behind his back. A few years ago, I was on the outs with a very dependent girlfriend. What started out as just casual dating turned into her practically living at my house, needing to constantly be in contact with me and always trying to spy on my social media accounts. She was extremely depressed and used my sympathy as a weapon to keep pulling me back whenever one of her crazy actions would push me away. It took my stupid younger self a long time to see the pattern. When I finally did and she realized that she was losing me, she ran over my dog, thinking that the grieving process would bring us back together. The worst part is, it kind of did. The pain of having to drive my dog to the vet and put him down was too much for me to handle on my own, and for once, she was there for me instead of the other way around. Until a few weeks later, when she drunkenly admitted what she had done. I have never been so mad about anything. I was brought up to never raise my hand to a woman, but my morals were serious. Why test it at that point? I couldn't get the trip to the vet to put the little guy down out of my head. How could this person that I loved have done something so psychopathic? I threw all of her things out and had to physically remove her from my house. I filed a restraining order, but before it went through, I had to threaten to press charges to keep her away. I haven't talked to her since. I feel bad for anyone that gets caught up in her psycho behavior. I thought she loved me, but that really led me to wonder if she was some kind of psycho or sociopath who had been playing me for a fool the whole time. Hi guys, Lazy Hair here, and thank you very much for listening. Special thanks to Eden and Lady White Rabbit for narrating the female perspective stories in this video. I thought that would make things a bit more engrossing, and given the subject matter, I thought it worked really well. So make sure to check out both of their channels by following the links down below or by clicking on air icons on the screen right now. Stay spooky, and remember, the best things happen in the dark. The following pictures you're about to see were taken by hikers Orly and Dante, who both live in Eagle Mountain, Utah, a small town south of Salt Lake City. For the past few years, they had been exploring forests in search of interesting things, and one day they found it. One day, Orly was hiking in Cedar Fort, just 5 miles south of Salt Lake City. While hiking, she found large amounts of animal bones and piles of junk people had dumped, but things started to get strange when she started coming across strange symbols and animal parts scattered throughout the forest, some of them in weird formations. On September 15th, she decided to bring her friend Dante along with her to show him in person the unusual things she was finding. This time, the two came across something even more disturbing. On the trail, there was a severed deer head and a pentagram surrounded by deer legs, which were not there the first time Orly walked the trail. The sun was going down, and after getting their pictures, they agreed it was time to head back to the car. But the more they walked, they realized they didn't recognize the path they were on. So, the two started looking around for anything that could refresh their memory of where they were. But as it got dark out, the two accepted that they were lost. With nothing but their phone flashlights to navigate, they started getting the feeling they were being watched. As they picked up their pace, the two started to hear the trees and bushes moving at least 20 feet to their right, made more concerning by the fact that there was no wind that night. The two started to panic and hurried onto a trail they found, hoping it would take them back to Orly's car. Just when things couldn't seem to get any worse, Orly and Dante heard a scream so deep and horrific that it sounded neither human nor animal. The two sprinted down the trail, Orly making a conscious effort not to look back, but Dante did. Dante claimed to see a large black figure on the trail behind them, too big to be a human. The two made it to the car by some stroke of luck, losing whatever was chasing them. So, they left the forest and went straight home. Orly has not returned since. This story just happened last year. I work as a receptionist at a hotel, and we often hold high school proms here as we have a big hall and a stage. In order to get to the hall, you have to pass the reception desk. It was prom night, and it was already underway. All the students and teachers were in the dance hall. All the pictures had been taken, and the reception area was empty. At some point during the evening, someone approached the reception desk. I looked up to see a tall man standing there. He had a clean-shaven face, and his hair was greasy and tied back in a ponytail. He was also wearing a suit that was pretty old and dirty, along with some Adidas shoes. His eyes were wide open, and he said, "I'm here for the prom." At first, I thought he was kidding, but he looked completely serious. I said, "Are you employed by the school?" He said, "No, I'm a student here." I still kept thinking he was joking. He looked to be in his late 40s, and he was telling me he was a high school student. So, I asked him, "How old are you?" He said, "I'm 17. "No, 16. "Yeah, 16. At this point, I thought he must have taken something. I said, "I'm sorry, but you don't look 16 at all." He just stared at me, not saying a word with his eyes wide, staring right at me. He then leaned over to me and said, "I'll make you a deal. I have a big blade in my pocket. If I'm not 16, you can cut my finger off. If I am 16, I can cut your finger off." I didn't get the chance to say anything 'cause he walked out right after he said that. I told my boss about what happened. He said if the guy came back he'd deal with it. I finished my shift around midnight and then went to get in my car. There was an envelope under my windshield wiper. Written on it was, "The deal is a deal." I opened the envelope to see a human finger, and I had a feeling this wasn't his own finger due to it being a different color. I never saw that man again, and I've always wondered why he was trying to get into that prom. About 2 years ago, I used to work part-time at a popular pizza chain as a delivery driver. I had a full-time job during the day, so the shift at the pizza place would be from 6 p.m. to 12 a.m. I enjoyed the job for the fact that I made good money and it was easy, but I hated working at night because it was dangerous. One night, we got a call 30 minutes before closing for a delivery in the worst part of town. I was stuck taking the order since my manager sent the other driver home early because it was a slow night. I hurriedly headed out to deliver the pizza. About 30 minutes later, my GPS said I had arrived. I couldn't read the house number as it was pitch dark and none of the houses had their porch lights on. As a safety precaution, I called the customer to ask if they could turn on their light. He didn't answer until like the sixth ring. He tells me his house has 2 trash bins next to the curb and that the light is broken, so he can't turn it on. He hangs up the phone. I start walking through the front yard to the front door when I see a man staring at me through the window. I yell out, "Hello," to him, but there's no reaction. He doesn't even move to open the door. I'm getting goosebumps now, and I decide to turn back around and go to the car. I call the customer again to come get his pizza from my car. He tells me in a slow, creepy voice to ignore his roommate and that the door is unlocked and if I could take the pizza to the basement. As I'm on the phone, I could make out a small light from the window. The man that was staring at me earlier was on the phone talking to me. I hung up and took off. By the time I got back to the restaurant, phones were turned over, so any complaints would have to wait until the next day. I'm not delivering to any basements, and I'm taking your pizza home for dinner. Osaka University boasted one of the most extensive library collections in the country, drawing scholars and students alike to its prestigious halls. Yet beneath its grandeur lay a dark secret that few dared to speak of. Rumors whispered of a hidden section of the library known as the Dark Night, where forbidden knowledge and ancient tomes were kept under lock and key. Curiosity led Karina, a freshman at Osaka, to seek out the elusive section despite warnings from her peers. Late one night, Karina ventured into the depths of the library, following a trail of flickering lights and echoing whispers. As she entered the dark night, she felt a chill run down her spine, the air thick with the scent of decay. Among the dusty shelves, Karina discovered a tome bound in black leather, its pages adorned with strange symbols and sigils. Ignoring the warnings etched into its cover, she began to read aloud from its pages, unaware of the dark forces she was about to unleash. Suddenly, the shadows around her began to stir, coalescing into sinister shapes that loomed over her like specters of the night. Terrified, Karina tried to flee but found herself trapped within the dark night, the walls closing in around her. Desperate for escape, Karina searched for a way out, stumbling upon a hidden chamber concealed behind a tapestry. Inside, she found a mirror adorned with ancient runes, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly glow. With no other options left, Karina reached out and touched the mirror, hoping it would transport her to safety. To her astonishment, the mirror rippled like water, and she found herself standing outside Osaka University, the shadowed stacks disappearing into thin air behind her. Shaken but alive, Karina vowed never to speak of her harrowing ordeal, knowing that some secrets were better left buried in the darkness. Out upon the open sea, where the horizon stretches on forever and the depths conceal untold secrets, sailed the trawler-cursed Endeavor, a vessel steeped in legend and whispered tales of woe. For generations, it had plied the waters in search of riches untold, its crew bound by a dark pact that none dared to break. Among those who called the cursed trawler home was Captain Drake, a weathered seafarer with a haunted look in his eyes and a past shrouded in mystery. For years, he had served as master of the ship, guiding her through storms and tempests with a skill that bordered on the supernatural. But as the years wore on, the crew began to whisper of strange happenings aboard the trawler, whispers of voices in the night, of shadows that moved of their own accord, and of a curse that had followed them across the 7 seas. Undeterred by such tales, Captain Drake pressed on, determined to uncover the truth behind the curse that plagued his ship. But with each passing day, the supernatural occurrences grew more frequent and more terrifying, until even the bravest among them trembled at the thought of what lurked in the darkness below. It was on a moonless night, with the wind howling and the waves crashing against the hull, that the curse finally revealed its true form. As the crew gathered on deck, their faces pale with fear, a monstrous shape rose from the depths, its eyes burning with a hatred that chilled the soul. With a deafening roar, the creature lashed out, its tentacles snaking across the deck with deadly precision. Panic ensued as the crew fought for their lives, their screams lost in the fury of the storm that raged around them. But amidst the chaos, Captain Drake stood firm, his eyes blazing with a determination born of desperation. With a mighty roar, he rallied his crew, leading them in a final desperate assault against the creature that threatened to drag them all to a watery grave. And as dawn broke over the horizon, the cursed trawler sailed on, battered but unbroken, its crew united in their victory over the darkness that had sought to claim them. For though the curse may linger still, they knew that as long as they stood together, they would never again fear the horrors that lurked beneath the waves. Far from civilization, nestled deep within a remote valley, flowed a river teeming with life and death in equal measure. It was said that the spirits of those who had perished in its unforgiving currents still haunted its banks, seeking vengeance on the living who dared to trespass upon their domain. Among the bravest, or perhaps the most foolish, was Nadia, a thrill-seeker with a penchant for danger that bordered on obsession. Determined to test her mettle against the river's legendary inhabitants, she embarked on a solo kayaking expedition, heedless of the warnings that echoed in her ears. As she navigated the treacherous rapids, Nadia felt a chill wind sweep down from the mountains, carrying with it whispers of the past and the promise of doom. Ignoring the sense of unease that gnawed at her insides, she pressed on, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. But as she rounded a bend in the river, she was greeted by a sight that froze the blood in her veins. A spectral figure, pale and ethereal, drifted silently upon the water's surface, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light, fixated upon Nadia with a hunger that sent shivers down her spine. Paralyzed with terror, she watched as the figure drew nearer, its form twisting and contorting with each passing moment. And then, with a sudden burst of speed, it lunged forward, its icy fingers closing around Nadia's throat with a grip that stole the very breath from her lungs. Gasping for air, she fought against the spectral assailant, her paddle swinging wildly as she struggled to break free. But the spirit's grasp was unyielding, its grip tightening with each passing second until Nadia could feel her consciousness slipping away. Just when all seemed lost, a blinding light pierced the darkness, driving back the specter with a force that sent it shrieking into the night. Blinking away tears of relief, Nadia found herself face to face with a figure bathed in radiant light, a guardian spirit come to her aid in her hour of need. With a gentle touch, the spirit guided Nadia to safety, its presence warding off the malevolent forces that lurked within the river's depths. And as she emerged from the water, shaken but alive, she knew that she would never again tempt fate in the haunted waters that lay beyond. As a child, I always found attics to be mysterious places, filled with forgotten treasures and hidden secrets. But what I discovered in the attic of my childhood home would forever change my perception of those dusty, cobweb-covered spaces. It all started on a lazy summer afternoon, when my parents decided it was time to clean out the attic and rid of the clutter that had accumulated over the years. As we climbed the creaky stairs and pushed open the heavy attic door, a wave of nostalgia washed over me, mingled with a sense of trepidation at what we might find hidden in the shadows. The attic was a labyrinth of old boxes and forgotten relics, with dusty furniture and forgotten memories scattered among the cobwebs. As we began to sift through the detritus of years gone by, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that some unseen presence lurked just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. And then, as I reached the far corner of the attic, I saw it, a small, nondescript box tucked away behind a pile of old blankets. Curiosity getting the better of me, I reached out and opened the box, revealing its contents to the dim light of the attic. Inside were photographs old and yellowed with age, depicting scenes from another time. But as I looked closer, I realized that these were no ordinary photographs. They were images of my family, taken long before I was born, in a house that looked eerily similar to the one we were currently in. As I flipped through the photographs, a sense of unease settled over me, as if I was peering into a past that had been intentionally forgotten. And then, as I reached the bottom of the box, I found a photograph that sent a chill down my spine, a picture of a young boy standing in front of the same attic door, his eyes wide with fear. It was then that I realized the truth. The attic was haunted by the spirits of those who had come before, trapped in a liminal space between the past and the present. As I looked around at the dusty relics of a bygone era, I knew that I would never be able to forget the horrors that lurked within the forgotten attic of my childhood home. As a father of a daughter, this incident will haunt me for the rest of my life. My 16-year-old daughter Laura grew up to be the brightest young lady, and my wife John and I couldn't be prouder of her. Laura was so jolly that she made friends wherever she went. It was the month of November, and everyone was getting ready to celebrate the winter festivals coming our way. Our family celebrated Thanksgiving at my brother's farmhouse every year in Ohio, so we drove there a week before Thanksgiving to make some cheerful memories. One morning, I was headed to the bank to finish some important paperwork before leaving for Ohio when I noticed a boy standing on the sidewalk facing our house and looking at the window of my daughter's room. He was smiling while staring at Laura's room. I was about to knock him out, thinking he was stalking her, but when I looked up, I saw Laura was standing in front of her window and waving at him with a blushed face. I realized now that they knew each other, so it would be better to talk to Laura first before hurling on this boy. I left and decided to sit down with Laura and talk that night. After finishing dinner, Laura was heading upstairs. I stopped her and told her to sit next to me. I wanted to talk to you about that boy. Who? What are you saying, Dad? Relax, Laura, you don't have to be afraid. I just wanted to know who he is. Her face turned red as she hesitated for some time. Honey, don't be afraid. We just want the best for you. Come on, tell us about him, John added. His name is Ross. He is in my class. Okay, where does he live? 2 blocks away. His dad is the local sheriff. Really? That's good. I know the sheriff. So how long have you guys been friends? We met at a science fair. He is a nice guy, Dad. We like each other. Okay, I don't have any issues, but we need to set some boundaries for your safety. No matter how much John mocked me for becoming a bit possessive about my daughter, it was natural. I set the common boundaries that any dad would to protect his teenage daughter in her growing years. Soon, I started to see Ross walking Laura home after school. I couldn't find anything wrong with him, and being the sheriff's son, I was a bit relieved, thinking maybe he is better than other high school boys. One day, I was coming home from work and on my way, I stopped at the local department store to buy some necessary things before leaving for Thanksgiving. There, I met the local sheriff, Mr. Daniel Truman. He was shopping for some groceries as well. I walked up to him and said, "Hello, Daniel." "Hey, how are you, Alex?" "I am good." "So, any plans for Thanksgiving?" "Not much. Going to stay home with my son, I guess." "Talking about your son, are you aware that he and my daughter are becoming friends now?" I expected him to be happy about it, but instead, his face turned all serious, and he replied, "I see. What happened? Is something bothering you?" "No, just hoping they will be friends and nothing else." Saying this, he walked past me, and I felt very humiliated. I couldn't move for a few minutes as a sudden rude behavior caught me off guard. I came home and told my wife about this encounter. She too couldn't guess what could be the reason behind Sheriff Daniel's off-putting attitude. I mean, both the kids belong to good families, then why did he seem so upset his son was going out with my daughter? I didn't tell Laura all about this because I didn't want to complicate things for her at such a young age. We started to pack for our trip, and slowly this matter slipped away from my mind. 2 nights before our trip to Ohio, Laura came to me and said she doesn't want to go to her uncle's farmhouse this year. I asked her why. Laura remained silent, keeping her face down. I asked if she wished to spend Thanksgiving with Ross, and her face lit up immediately. I couldn't see my daughter sad, so I told her Ross could come with us if he wants to. Laura ran to call him, but I made sure his father agrees only then. The main reason why I allowed Ross to tag along was to keep my daughter close and also not to break her heart in this vulnerable age. The next morning, Ross came to my house. We talked about this entire trip thing, and I was stunned to see how confident he was. He was way more mature than half of the kids his age. He said his father has approved, and he is ready to come with us. Without much to do, we hopped into the car and got on the road. Ross was very well behaved, and my wife John kept saying the entire journey how cute they both looked. After driving for 3 hours, we reached Crystal Lake. The sun was about to set, and a dying yellow light mixed with the blue night sky made the horizon look like a dream. My brother and his family greeted us in the house, and Laura introduced everyone to Ross. To my surprise, Ross won everyone over in a very short span. He was helping in the kitchen, playing with the kids, and also showed interest when we watched the game. It didn't feel at all like he was an outsider. Although he was settling completely well, I couldn't help but feel a bit weird about all this. I don't know why things were seeming too good to be true to me at that moment. As the night fell, we all sat down for dinner, and everyone was laughing and cheering. I was about to shove a big piece of beef steak in my mouth when my phone rang. I noticed it on the couch, so I got up and walked to get it. Everyone else didn't pay much attention to me and kept enjoying themselves. It was a call from an unknown number. As I picked it up, I could hear sirens of cop cars driving at fast speed as the sound of wind hovered through the phone speaker. "Hello, who is it?" "Alex, you must listen to me. This is Sheriff Truman. Act calm and go somewhere where my son can't hear you, please. Don't ask any questions or take my name, just do what I say." Even though I was confused like hell, my instinct said to follow the sheriff's instructions. Without expressing anything, I slowly walked out of the room to the back garden of the house. I closed the glass door behind me, and no one noticed me. Ronald was laughing with everyone else. I am alone now. What the hell is going on, Daniel? Where is Ronald now? In the living room. Eating dinner with my family. Will you please tell me what's going on here? Alex, my son is a deranged psychopath, and the only reason I wanted to keep him away from your daughter was to keep them both safe. I know I should have done something earlier, but as a father, I kept on burying the vicious crimes he did since he was 4 years old. First, he killed his pet dog and then started harming animals. But when he bludgeoned my wife to death, knowing she was pregnant with another child, I realized what devil we had brought into this world. He can't share those whom he thinks as his close ones. I didn't permit him to travel with you guys, so he threatened me with a gun and tied me up in the basement. When I finally managed to set myself free, I noticed he was going with one of my guns. He has taken them all and is going to murder your entire family to get Laura just for himself. You must stop him before becoming violent. Keep a close eye on him. I'm coming to your place. I have already tracked down your location from this call. Just please don't make him mad, or he will snap out like a venomous snake." Saying all this in one go, the sheriff disconnected the call, and I turned around with fearful eyes to my loving family, who were now seen laughing with a deranged murderer that has come with a plan to finish them all. I uttered to myself that I must keep calm and protect my family. I got inside and went straight to Ronald's room. My idea was to take the guns away, but as I opened his rucksack, I saw dozens of knives and other basic weapons, but the gun was missing. Seems like you and my dad both want to ruin my Thanksgiving this year. I turned back and found Ronald standing behind me with a gun. I lunged at him to take it away, but he dodged carefully and hit me on the head with the middle end of the gun. I fell unconscious on the floor with throbbing pain and heard Ronald say, "Happy Thanksgiving." I don't remember when I came back to my senses, but a squashy sound followed by a metallic smell started to take over my drowsy mind. I opened my eyes slowly and saw Laura tied up to a chair with a huge bruise on her head. She was unconscious as well, but as I laid my eyes around, I realized the danger is much bigger than this. All my family members, my wife, my brother, his wife, and his 2 kids, were lying on the floor bludgeoned to death. Yes, Ronald killed them all. What have you done? Oh, Alex, you're awake. Nothing, just getting what is mine. My dad had never understood me, but don't know why I think you will. I love your daughter, and I want her. I love her so much that I can't share her with anyone, not even her family, not even you. He raised his gun at me once again, and just then, the main door slammed open, and I heard 6 gunshots back to back. Bullets pierced his chest like crazy, and he fell on the floor, vomiting blood. As his lifeless body fell on the ground, I saw Sheriff Truman standing behind him with his empty gun. That night, a father shot his son to save another father and his daughter. I surely lost my family at the hands of a psychopath. And this pain will never go away. But whenever I think about Truman, who will have to live with this realization that he killed his son, I find my suffering small compared to him. Laura and I don't celebrate Thanksgiving anymore because neither of us feels thankful about anything in this life anymore. I had a vague idea of what this country was: meatball heads in the northeast, Dixieland to my south, and way out across the country was the hippie whole West Coast. Now, that's obviously a grossly oversimplified version of American culture, and those of you that took offense might be glad to know that I paid for my ignorance, because this is a big, wide country we live in, and there are places and people so radically different than ourselves, and the generic big city lifestyles we're all so used to that meeting them can be downright freaky. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Little Havana down in Miami is one of the most baller places on earth, but sometimes, different can be dangerous. So, in early 2018, I saw a post from a girl on Reddit's r4r sub saying she was stuck in her dorm board and wanted someone to talk to. She seemed pretty chill, but after creeping on her profile and finding out she was hot, I was psyched when she messaged me back and we got to talking. We got along even better than I thought we would. And it turned out we had a little chemistry too. So after flirting back and forth for a couple of weeks, we started to talk about hooking up. The only trouble was she was more than 500 miles away in Knoxville, Tennessee, which is like an 8-hour drive from Baltimore. She couldn't visit me because of school commitments, and the car I had at the time would have fallen apart as soon as it hit the interstate. It took me like 4 months to switch up my ride and stack some spending money, but once I had, I was itching to hit the road and hook up with my Reddit boo. Driving down the I-81 was simple enough, but since it was my first ever long-distance drive, it wasn't long before I messed up and took a wrong turn. It was right after I hit Roanoke, Virginia. I pulled into this little town called Blacksburg to get something to eat. Then a little after driving out of town, I started seeing signs saying, "Welcome to West Virginia," and stuff, which was most definitely not on my planned route. It was no big deal. Just a minor hiccup, and I figured I could just swing back southwest to get back on the interstate. But navigating those country roads proved to be easier said than done, and it wasn't long before casually lost became hopelessly lost, and by the time I rolled into this little one-stop light town, I wasn't even sure what state I was in. To give you an idea of what this little town was like, I saw one post office and 3 churches in the space of a couple hundred meters. I assume that isn't all that unusual for a small Bible Belt town, but the weird thing was that there wasn't a soul out in the streets. It reminded me of Sunday mornings in Greek town when almost everyone would pack into the Orthodox churches, but this was a Friday afternoon. That being said, the fact that there were like 50 cars and trucks parked outside this one church told me everything I needed to know, and if I wanted directions, it was looking like I was going to have to interrupt the little afternoon worship session. It's not like I hadn't seen anything weird in a church before. Like I've mentioned, I grew up in Greek Orthodox, and some of those priests looked like they moonlight as wizards. That's not to mention all the carpet kissing, holy haircuts, and crawling marathons that go on. But I've never seen anything like what was going on in this country church, and unlike the love thy neighbor Christianity that I feel like most of us are familiar with, these people were anything but welcoming. Walking into that church caused this record scratch moment where the guy at the pulpit just stops talking and looks up at me. This causes everyone, and I mean everyone, to spin around in their pew to look at me. I tried to speak up, but with all those eyes on me, I just sort of seized up. By the time I got it together to say anything, the guy at the pulpit cuts me off like, "You from the government?" Now bear in mind, I'm wearing Hawaiian shorts and a George Carlin shirt. I'm about 240 at the time, completely bald. And I have a front tooth missing. I look as far from a Fed as you can possibly imagine, but still, this guy is looking at me like I'm some kind of narc. I started explaining that I'm just looking for directions, but the guy cuts me off yet again and tells me, "Patience is a virtue, son. Take a seat, we're almost done here." Now, I know I should have just left and bought a map from a truck stop like a grown-up, but I was young, dumb, and full of, so my logic was just, get directions, get to girl, instead of stopping to consider that I might be way out of my depth. For a while, the atmosphere among the congregation was tense but still subdued. Their eyes were glued to the pulpit and their mouths were glued shut, but as the preacher's tone and intensity built, so did the energy and their responses and reactions. The first thing that really keyed me into the fact that these people weren't all there was the whole speaking in tongues thing. I heard it was still a thing that happened. But you don't see anything like that in Baltimore unless some dope fiend smokes too much spice, which is certainly no cause for celebration. But when this regular-looking guy jumps up out of his seat and starts jabbering this complete nonsense, the congregation was hooting and hollering like it was the greatest thing they'd ever seen. And while not necessarily the scariest thing I'd ever seen, it was incredibly jarring to actually see it with my own eyes. I'm already incredibly nervous, but I figured if I just keep my mouth shut and let them do their thing, I'll be out of there with a solid route back to I-81. Only the next thing I know, I hear the preacher calling out for their guest to join them at the head of the congregation. I just remember thinking, he can't be talking about me. There's no way he's talking about me, but that was pure wishful thinking on my part, because once again, the whole congregation turns around to look at me. "Come on up, son," the preacher's words were like daggers in my gut. I get pretty bad stage fright and anxiety as it is, but the idea of exposing myself to those people was almost too much to bear. I start making a show of saying, "No, thank you," trying to politely decline the guy's offer, standing briefly to address the guy before I sit back down. Only right when I do, I hear this voice in my ear like, "You'll get up there if you know what's good for you, city boy." I turn around, and standing behind me is this freaking werewolf of a man, incredibly hairy and wide as he was tall. Dude could have crushed my skull with one hand if he wanted, and he was blocking my route to exit. Suddenly, it didn't look like I had much of a choice anymore. So in spite of my legs feeling like warm jello, I made my way to the head of the congregation and awaited my fate. The first minutes or so were like appearing on a game show that I really didn't want to be on. The preacher asked me what my name was and where I was from in a weird way, too, asking me, "Were you given a Christian name, son?" I tell him my name is Nick, and I'm from Baltimore, that I'm just passing through town on my way to Knoxville. He asked me why I'm going to Knoxville, if I had family there, and I just nod instead of telling him the adulterous truth. Then he starts saying how outsiders have always plagued their community, how they try to protect their prim and proper ways onto good country folks, stuff like that. Then he starts talking about how they, who they were, I have no idea, tried to string up his grandpa in the 40s for handling, so now I'm really confused. What had he been handling, and why had they tried to kill him for it? Not knowing made the whole thing even worse for me, and I could actually feel the sweat dripping down my back as I got more and more nervous. I've told this story a bunch of times before, and one or two people knew exactly what handling meant in the context of some country preacher, but I didn't. If I had known, I'd have just rolled through that entire town content to be lost and ladyless. Because the one thing I'm more scared of than anything else on the face of the earth is snakes. But what was the one thing that crazy preacher pulled out of these wicker baskets he had up there with him? A freaking snake, and not just any old snake, a legit rattlesnake. At first, I just froze. I didn't know fear like that even existed, the kind where you can literally not move for a few seconds as you're confronted with your literal worst fear, that deer in the headlights effect. Jesus Christ, I can still hear the sound of its rattle like it was yesterday, like, you just don't get how loud those things can be until you actually hear it for yourself. It's a sound that says, "Get away from me, dude." I'm not to be messed with, and it doesn't need translating for you to know what it means. But here's this preacher guy just straight up holding it in his hands and smiling like it's the most normal thing in the world. Not just that, but you'd think he'd be super careful handling a freaking rattlesnake. But this guy is like bouncing it up and down in time with some old church music that starts playing out of an old stereo, all the while the congregation is hooting and hollering like it's the greatest thing they'd ever seen. You'd think you'd want to keep that thing nice and chill, but nope. If I was nervous, you can only imagine how that snake must have been feeling. So, like I said, I'm just frozen for a few moments until the preacher makes a move toward me with the snake in his arms. I wasn't frozen after that, let me tell you, and I just about bolted off the stage and toward the main entrance to the chapel. I channeled all the touch football agility from my middle school years to feint and dodge the 300-pound werewolf dude on the way out, sprinted to my car, and then just took off out of town at what felt like a buck and change. I've done some stupid things in the pursuit of females in my time, but walking into that little chapel tops the list by far. I had no idea snake handling was even a thing until then. And after I Googled it, I saw that dozens of snake handlers have died in the past. But that's not the stat that matters, it's how often they get bit. It messes up the muscles in people's arms and hands because they get bit so much, like it happens a lot. And after seeing how that preacher was handling his rattlesnake, I'm not the least bit surprised. Anyway, I made it to Knoxville a couple of hours later extremely shaken but in one piece. I hooked up with the Reddit girl, and after telling the story of accidentally walking into a snake handler chapel, I got all kinds of sympathy nookie. So I suppose all's well that ends well. Just know that as much as we're all Americans and all that patriotic stuff, there are places out there where outsiders are anything but welcome. Getting run out of somewhere probably sucks, but not nearly as much as losing your life because of some mentally deficient guy throwing a friggin' rattlesnake right at you. On May 19th of 1884, a yacht known as the Mignonette departed the English port of Southampton bound for the coast of eastern Australia. Constructed in 1867, the 52-ton cruiser had been purchased by an Australian lawyer named Jack W., who sought a suitable crew to transport her to Sydney. But it was no small feat. Many experienced sailors noted that the yacht was an inshore boat unsuited to long voyages in open waters. And what's more, even the most experienced sailors were intimidated by the 15,000-mile journey, with many turning the job offer down before a full crew was finally assembled. In the end, a four-man team was put together, which consisted of Captain Tom Dudley, Edwin Stevens, Edmund Brooks, and a 17-year-old cabin boy by the name of Richard Parker. Almost 2 months into their journey, the crew of the Mignonette found themselves sailing into a gale around 1,600 miles northwest of South Africa's Cape of Good Hope. Despite the fierce winds, their journey was progressing steadily. Then, in order to enjoy a good night's sleep, Captain Dudley gave the order to heave to. In sailing, heaving to is a way of slowing a vessel's forward progress, as well as fixing the helm and sail position so that the vessel does not have to be steered, is commonly used as a way for sailors to take a break or to wait out strong or contrary winds. However, just as the maneuver was completed and young Richard Parker was sent below to prepare tea, a freak wave struck the Mignonette,